Hello everyone and welcome back to the Final Chicane with me, Kristen Boylan. So the Japanese Grand Prix has been and gone and it's time to discuss and debrief it. I actually haven't even went over it in my head. I don't know what I think. I haven't gathered my thoughts. So that's what we're going to have to do today. We're going to gather our thoughts together about what has just happened in Suzuka because I don't even know. You know what? We'll wait. We'll wait to discuss. Let's get into the riddle of the week. I know I've been saying this sort of a lot recently, but I'm actually really happy with this riddle of the week. I just feel like I'm doing a good job at them. Not many people are getting them, but this one might be a bit easier because if you've been watching Formula 1 longer than 2023, you should get it. So here we go. In a stampede of bulls, I found my flight, and then in red, a champion not quite. Yet amidst the speed, my heart's true beat, for bees and earth I take my seat. The youngest to win, with the cars I named, only recently out of the racing game. Who am I? Let me know in the comments or on my TikTok or on my Instagram. It will be posted everywhere. Let me know if you get it right so I know how smart yous are. What a weekend in Japan, in Suzuka. It's the first time that it has been this early in quite a while. It's usually sometime around September, maybe October. And even before that, it was usually October, nearing the end of the championship. There were a lot of championship deciders that took place in Suzuka or where it used to be in Fiji. In Japan, the only two places it has ever been since around the late 1950s. I think weather-wise, probably a bit of a move to have it here. I don't know what the reason was to move it up. I'm not too sure. But it didn't rain and usually the weather is quite bad in Suzuka and I'm sort of happy it didn't rain. I don't love a rainy Suzuka race for obvious reasons, which does bring us on to it being 10 years since the very, very unfortunate crash of Jewel Bianchi in Suzuka, the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix. It's not 10 years to the day or the month or anything like that. I think the crash happened in October, but it is the 10th anniversary sort of year. It's the 10th year since. Basically, God, I butchered that up, but you know what I mean. So yeah, I think it was important to think about Jewel a lot this weekend. I will say, I know I made a few TikToks and one person in particular was really unhappy with my pronunciation because I said Jules Bianchi. And in French, in Irish, we would like say Jules, in English, whatever. But in French, it's Jewel. So if that offended anyone, sorry. And Bianchi, a lot of commentators say different things, but I would like to stress that there are a lot of difficult words to pronounce in Formula 1. I'm just going to go on around about this really quickly. I struggle with pronunciation a lot in everything. My friends know, my family know. I can't pronounce anything. When I first got into Formula 1, I pronounced it Grand Prix for so long. Livery instead of livery. I pronounced, probably up until 3 years ago, I was pronouncing it livery. Saber. Up until this morning, I always thought it was pronounced Saber. I guess I haven't said that too much because they were never a team in the form of Sauber when I was watching Formula 1. But I just learned that today. So we love that. That's so embarrassing. Why did no one call me out on me calling them Saber? Maybe I didn't call them Saber actually on the podcast. Maybe I was saying steak. But yeah, sorry about that, guys. Have learnt. There's a lot of hard words to pronounce in Formula 1, and I feel like we shouldn't jump to the you're being so disrespectful by not learning how to pronounce that, because I literally look up how to pronounce it and everyone pronounces it a different way. It can be hard. But yeah, I'll talk about Jules a bit, because Jules was an incredibly important figure in Formula 1. Unfortunately, when he did pass away, or when he did get into his crash, it was very early into his Formula 1 career, so it was quite a sad thing not to be able to see his growth. A lot of people thought that he would be a Ferrari driver. He was in the Ferrari Academy before he joined his team. That's where a lot of the sort of Charles is doing what he would be doing now comes from. A lot of people don't love just comparing Charles's career, and we definitely shouldn't do that, but I think Charles is trying to live it out for Jules as well, obviously for himself too. And Daniel said something similar as well. But it has been nice recapping on all of the memories that some of the drivers have of Jules. I know Daniel and Jules were really good friends. They lived in Italy together, and Daniel shares some nice memories with Jules as well. Obviously, he was close to quite a few people on the grid, and it was a big loss. So I'm sure it is a struggle coming back to Suzuka every year to race. They haven't, I know they took a few years off during COVID. It's always going to be a difficult weekend. Charles had a really nice tribute helmet to Jules as well. And I know he will probably be disappointed not to have got the podium, but Charles had an incredible race as well. So he should be proud. Yeah, it was nice to remember the good moments of Jules's career this weekend. Okay, we'll talk about some of the media moments as we always do before we actually get into the racing. There was a lot of media moments. There always is. Media moments take up the entirety of the Grand Prix, to be honest. The first set of news that came out that I woke up to, because I wasn't staying awake for the press conferences, was that Daniel Ricciardo said that he's getting a new chassis in China, which is sort of a big deal. If you haven't really been keeping up, Daniel is quite adamant that there is something wrong with the car. I find this interesting because if you know Daniel and if you followed him for quite a few years, you know that he's the first one to put his hand up and be like, I am doing something wrong here. I need to push harder. I need to figure out what's going on. That was his entire approach in the McLaren era. But now he's like, I can work on this, but there's also something that isn't right. He feels that there's something wrong with the car and he doesn't know what that is. But now he can feel something. It's very different because in McLaren, he had no idea. He couldn't feel anything wrong with the car, but now he can. So he wanted to get his chassis inspected, even like if they found nothing wrong. So he could be like, okay, obviously there's something wrong with me then, or whatever. But he wanted, and it's fair enough to want to get that inspected because these racing drivers, they can feel every tiny little thing that goes wrong or that feels different with their car. So when something doesn't feel right, they're going to want to get that checked out. So Daniel is getting a new chassis in China. This is not because of his struggles, actually. This is just a thing that's already happening. I think after his crash, which I will get into today, it's probably good that there is a new chassis next race. But yeah, so that will be interesting because imagine if there is something wrong and Daniel feels more comfortable in his new car. I know it's not a new car, you know what I mean? So I do think that will be something to look out on. It's a bit of a risky maybe time to bring in a new chassis with the sprint race, and he has very little free practice. Obviously, if you don't know, there is a new structure to the sprint. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But yeah, I'm just excited and hopeful, really hopeful that there will be a change. What else? Seb. Has anyone seen the amount of content that has been coming out of Sebastian Vettel this weekend? I don't know how people can't love Sebastian. I know obviously people's opinions on him were very much varied when he was fighting his world championships, but I guess this is sort of bad to say, but since Ferrari and since he stopped becoming too competitive, he's so pure. I love Seb. I really love Seb. All he wants to do is look after the environment, but now it's sort of seeming like he sort of wants to get back into the racing game. He did say that he only wants to get back into it though if it is right. Like if it feels right, if he's got a good car. So that's interesting for him to say. He was on the Fast and Curious podcast. You should go watch that. Not to support my competitors, even though there's no competition. But I love that podcast. I'll tell you what, I love a good Formula One podcast where they're quite balanced, if that makes sense, about how they feel about drivers, and you're not going to go in with you're not leaving with a bad feeling because you've just listened to people hate on someone for the last hour. That's also what I try to do in my podcast. Obviously, I try to make it as balanced and as much for everyone as possible, and I hope you guys see that too. You see how easy I get sidetracked. But yeah, so that is exciting me about Seb. I want to know, if Seb was to join Formula One, where would you want to see him? Because he's German. Audi is coming in 2026. They could do with an experienced driver. Not that I don't think some rookies deserve it. Obviously, I'd love to see more rookies on the grid. But I just also want to see Seb on the grid. I mean, if a Red Bull seat becomes free in the next 2 years, can you imagine a Red Bull return for Seb? And I'm only saying that just not because I think any Red Bull driver deserves to lose their seat, because after this year, they don't. They there's a good team there. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's a Mercedes seat free. Out of those three, Audi, Red Bull, Mercedes, where would you like to see Seb? Somewhere new, like Mercedes, the German manufacturers in Audi, whatever you want to say, or back home at Red Bull. Maybe he could get like the redemption story that people wanted for Daniel. Maybe both him and Daniel could go back to Red Bull, and Max and Checo could drive in Visa Cash App or B, and Yuki can go Mercedes. There, I've just sorted out the entire grid. They would probably still do well in Visa Cash App or B as well, wouldn't they? Max would probably win. That was a joke, obviously. McLaren had a new livery. I am not gonna lie, I didn't notice it. I did notice it when I was watching today, but I liked the pictures. I thought it looked really nice. It just wasn't very noticeable, or maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to McLaren's. Maybe they weren't on the screen enough. We'll say that. But yeah, their livery was designed by Milt, and it was an Edo emoji calligraphy. That's the word I'm looking for. Japanese styled livery. It was gorgeous. The colours were nice. It was very subtle. Like I said, I didn't really notice it. But beautiful, beautiful livery by Milts. I have to say, the creativity from the Japanese fans is next to none. Did you see the video of the guy who had, I'm so sorry, I don't know what the hats are called. I probably should have looked that up, sorry. But how he switched it from Ferrari to Aston Martin or something like that. That was iconic, and I'm going to have to think of something to do. Is that all the media moments? That's all I can sort of think of. Maybe we didn't have that much media moments at this week's Grand Prix. That can be a good thing, though. Oscar Piastri's birthday. Oh my god, that clip of Oscar Piastri speaking Japanese. What can't that boy do? Are you kidding me? He knows so much words in Japanese, like random words related to racing even. So he probably knows like all of the basics, and then he knew like all those random words. That was very impressive. Oscar Piastri just keeps impressing, doesn't he? Let's get into the talk of the race. We'll start with free practice. Number 1 and 3 I didn't watch because I wasn't getting up at 3:30 a.m. when I had college. I'm done college now. That might change. If there's any other ones, I can't remember. Don't know what time China is at. Is that like 9 a.m? I feel like China's at a more reasonable time. Logan obviously crashed in FP1, and Logan was driving Albon's car, Albon's damaged but repaired car. They said, oh, like Alex's car is completely fine. That's obviously not the case, because then why would Logan be driving it? Why wouldn't Alex be driving it? That was the big sort of talk of free practice, I guess. Like, I don't think it was that big of a deal, though. One thing Logan does have to get under control, I would say, is not crashing and not spinning off. It's him trying to find the limits of the car, which is completely understandable. It doesn't make him a bad driver. It's just something that he should probably try rein in, you know. It'd be good if he could find the limits of the car without, but we still see the most experienced drivers crash and spin out. So he doesn't deserve the amount of hate that he gets that he got for that. Obviously, we also don't know if there was an issue with the car, but by the onboard it did look like it was sort of fault of Logan. But they repaired the car. He missed out on one practice, but they repaired the car. Wasn't too bad of a crash. You know, we saw Alex crash in Australia, obviously. We saw Ayumu Iwasa in Daniel's car in FP1. Nice to see 2 Japanese drivers on the grid. Nice to see a rookie on the grid in general. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't too great for Daniel. But yeah, Iwasa was impressive. He was just under, I think, a second slower than Yuki. You can't really expect much, though. It was a lot about him getting his feel for a Formula 1 car. I'm not sure if he has driven before. I can't remember who was doing the FP1s last year or the year before. But yeah, that was nice to see. Then obviously FP2 was raining for most of it. No one really got out for times. And FP3, yeah, just not a lot of happening. There were a few complaints in FP3. A lot of people felt uncomfortable with the car. There was just quite a few problems. Daniel spun, but it was actually quite a big spin. He recovered it quite well, though. He had a new floor. Oh, I didn't mention that, did I? Visa Cash app Orbi brought in a new floor this weekend. So Yuki was testing it in FP1, and he said, yeah, I'm not too comfortable with it. Like, it's not bad, but I just don't feel as comfortable as I could be with it, or as comfortable as I was with the last one. I am not gonna lie, I don't know if Yuki has the new floor then, if he wasn't comfortable with it. I'm guessing they were both running it, right? But Daniel was running it then. So in FP3, obviously he had to get used to it and he had a little spin. He didn't crash the car or anything, so it was fine. Which does make his result a little more disappointing because he did have a floor that he was a bit more comfortable in. Yeah, hopefully we can see a bit more improvement then if they get more comfortable with the floor, and if other improvements are made, if they can get a bit more data to improve with the new data they receive from the floor. Okay, qualifying. I didn't take a lot of notes. I have this little book. It's a cute little notebook, isn't it? But I didn't take a lot of notes during qualifying. Pierre and Stroll, I don't know what happened there. Stroll, especially, to qualify with such a difference between Alonso. I think me and Stroll were both at a loss of what happened there. Pierre, the Alpine, you can't expect much from it right at the moment. Hopefully that will change. But Esteban, in comparison, had a really good weekend, or a really good qualifying at least. He qualified really well. If you heard his team radio after qualifying, it was so cute how happy he got. We just love to see a happy driver, I don't like seeing any of the drivers upset or disappointed in their performance. So yeah, two quite significant differences between their teammates there. There was that pit lane impeding from George impeding Oscar, but there was just a fine handed out to Mercedes for that. So George was lucky, I guess. He didn't get any sort of penalty for that. Bottas, wow. Bottas had a flyer lap. Did you see that getting out of Q1? He went into the top 10. So impressive. Daniel also had a good lap to get him just a few places behind Bottas, and Yuki 1 place behind Daniel just in Q1. That was a good qualifying. Oscar Lando, on the pace there. I was a bit worried because was it Charles that was on the brink and he just didn't go out to do another one, which was a bit worrying. He didn't need to in the end, obviously, for Q2. But yeah, it just stresses me out sometimes when they wait until the last minute to send a car out, or they don't send them out at all. It can be a bit, yeah. Q3 then. Who got into Q3? Yuki got into Q3. Very impressive. P10, Daniel P11. Only half a tenth between them, which is incredible. I know Daniel would want to be getting into Q3. He'd want to be beating Yuki. But for the struggles that he's had in qualifying, and qualifying is the only place he has had struggles, it's very impressive for him to... I mean, Yuki is just on fire. It's his home race. Can't believe I haven't mentioned that yet. It's Yuki's home race. You should see the designs and stuff for Yuki this weekend. He had a cute storyboard sort of thing coming in where it was his journey through motorsports in big posters on the walls, which are so cute. He has so much support in Japan. It was really nice to see. At the start of the weekend, he said no, he doesn't really feel too much pressure from his home crowd, being in his home crowd, I guess. But then by Saturday evening, he was like, yeah, okay, I feel the pressure. And I was a bit confused when he didn't, because, yeah, it can be hard having that many people root for you and you know that their mood going home is going to rely on you. So I'd say that was a struggle, but luckily the Yuki fans should be happy. Charles obviously had a bit of a struggle in quali. Was it P7 or P8? I'm not too sure. I'm not completely sure what went wrong in Charles's area. I think it might have been an issue with tyres. He couldn't find the grip maybe on the softs. So that was definitely a bit disappointing, especially for Charles. I know out of any weekend, this is one of the ones that he would have wanted to do well for Jules. He said that as well. He said he'd do anything to be on the podium. But unfortunately, that didn't work out like that this weekend. I think qualifying Norris was probably the most impressive. P3, insanely impressive. The McLaren has the pace at times to be up there, but they have to have two really good drivers in it to make that happen, and they do. Oscar and Lando are the perfect pair for McLaren. Every week they get everything out of it. You wouldn't know Oscar was a rookie last year. He just seems like an incredibly experienced driver, and obviously he is Lando as well, a more experienced driver, and that does come across sometimes, especially in defending. I think definitely the strongest pairing on the grid. I say that every episode, I think, but it's the truth. Max, insane. Can't say much, just constantly improving on his time. He was disappointed with his pole lap. Disappointed with how fast he was, which is insane. You're so much faster than everyone else, Max. What are you complaining about? And Checo, amazing weekend from Checo. Qualifying right on Max's tail the entire time. He made no mistakes. There was very little in between their lap times the entire weekend. I thought it was really impressive from Checo. He had a really great weekend. Alonso as well, I don't know if Alonso was out driving the car or Lance was under driving it this weekend, but very impressive from Alonso, of course. Who else haven't I talked about? Of course, Sauber Stake F1 team. I'm really not sure what they're going by this weekend. Not a great weekend for them car wise. I mean, they were both quite similar to each other. Joe, unfortunately, I think P20, wasn't he? I don't know if he had a problem there. So not a great weekend for Sauber. Haas, good race, not as good qualifying, but not bad qualifying either. They're sort of in a rut, I think. Like, they're just sort of stuck where they are, Haas, and they'd want to be making that push, because right now it's looking like Visa are the team, the best of the rest, sort of. The rest meaning the best out of the top 10, out of not including Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, or Aston Martin then. But it did look like Haas sort of towards the start of the season, so I'm sort of excited to see how that changes. Mercedes as well, nothing really out of the normal with Mercedes. Overall, not too surprising of a qualifying, but still a good watch. Should we talk about the race? I will say it is a lot harder to do a race review by yourself, because I'm just spewing my opinions and I don't really have anyone to bounce back off of. So I hope you can talk out loud to yourself as if we're having a conversation. I'm very good at listening to other people's opinions, but mine are right anyway, so I don't really need anyone else here. Nothing happened lap one. I don't even remember a race happening after lap one, because nothing happened. There wasn't a crash. Alex didn't crash. Daniel didn't crash lap one. I didn't even see a thing. Guys, how painful to be a Williams or Daniel fan this year, because all Williams are doing is crashing, and they're looking good. They're driving fast when it matters, and then sometimes when it matters, they're not. They're crashing. They're in the wall. If someone has spun, if there's a red flag, it's usually Williams. I don't know if it's that the car is just a bit unsteady, unstable, if they're just not comfortable with the car this year. But that does seem to be happening to both of them quite a lot. And it's sort of rare that it happens to both teammates, if that makes sense. Usually there's always one Williams driver who spins and crashes a lot. And Logan does a bit more than Alex, but they are both seeming a bit unsteady with the car. Obviously it wasn't Alex's fault, this crash, or Daniel's fault. It was a racing incident that is confirmed by race control. They had a meeting. You know, it was clear to see it was a racing incident. In no way it would have been Alex's fault anyway. Alex didn't do anything wrong there. Unfortunately, Daniel was sort of caught up. He had to move to his right so as he wouldn't make contact with the Aston Martin. But as he moved to his right, you know, he wouldn't have had time to do his observations, to check his right mirror to see that Alex was there. So either way, you know, Daniel was sort of, if he didn't move, there probably would have been contact with the Aston Martin, and he did move. There was contact with Alex, and there wasn't much Alex could have done as well. He did try to back off, but unfortunately it was quite a big shunt as well. It's never nice to see a car crash in Suzuka, and I think you could tell that by a lot of the other drivers making sure that both Alex and Daniel was okay. It was a very high speed shunt, but obviously they were both okay. I did see that Daniel did have to press the fire extinguisher button. I don't know if there was a fire, if maybe he thought there was one, but look, that would have destroyed the floor. But luckily he's getting a new chassis next week anyway, so they're sorted. Williams, I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know how bad the damage was. I haven't really seen much on it. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out there'll be a bit of news, but I'm hoping it'll be okay. It was Logan's perfectly fine car that crashed. You know, obviously Alex wasn't driving his own car, he was driving Logan's. So, and then Logan crashed as well. Completely missed that crash, but he got going again. So I'm guessing it wasn't too bad of one. Unfortunately, I do have to take responsibility for Daniel and Alex crashing, because it was my fault. I said right before they crashed, I was like, oh, I do not trust these Visa Cash App or Bs, because they looked all over the place. Not even a second later, not even a tenth later, they crashed. They crashed while I said that. That was poor for me. It was my fault that they crashed. And the one thing going through my mind was, oh my God, Daniel is going to be slated on the internet, even though this wasn't his fault, because people don't care this year, which is very strange, because if you've been like in Formula 1 a long time, Daniel may not be people's favourites, but he was a driver that everyone like was sort of content with, sort of like Charles. Like, how do people hate him? But that has changed this year. He gets the most hate out of any driver on the grid this year for sure. And a lot of that is coming from people disguised as Yuki fans, I've noticed. Yuki fans tend to keep to Yuki, as they should. They celebrate Yuki's accomplishments, which there have been very many this year. You can tell though, because there's a lot of people who are Yuki fans who just want to see Daniel do bad, if that makes sense. Like, if Daniel had nothing to do with Yuki, then they wouldn't be paying Yuki attention. And you can tell that based on, if Yuki does well, their first thought is he did better than Daniel and not Yuki did well. But hopefully Yuki's fan base does. Yuki has a huge fan base. He has an absolutely huge fan base of like real fans who love him. I would be part of that fan base, of course. My brother is probably the biggest Yuki fan ever. He loves Yuki. But yeah, you can also tell like the people who haven't sort of been watching Formula 1 for a while, which is fine, because like, what, are they just not allowed to watch it because they didn't start watching it early? But based on sort of their opinions on Daniel's career, because a lot of people are thinking Daniel's career is like McLaren. And that's it, forgetting like the incredible stuff he did. Even the good races he had in McLaren, and even last year, was it Mexico or Brazil? One of them was a bad race, one of them was a good race. But he had an incredible race in Brazil, I think. I think he had a really good race in Mexico when he qualified like P4 or P5 or something like that, and he finished like P6 maybe. I don't think my numbers are completely right about that. But yeah, the Daniel hate is so unjustified, especially if you look at the fact that he hasn't had bad races this year. He has had bad qualifyings and he needs to get on top of that, because you can't just rely on being good in a race. You need to qualify, especially at the tracks that are harder to overtake on. And unfortunately, there's been quite a few at the start of the year that aren't the best for overtaking on. But his race has been on par with Yuki. The timings haven't been off. He has made up quite a few positions, but he just needs to not have those positions to make up. He needs to be making up those positions from a higher qualifying position. But I think people are like looking at his qualifyings and not even looking at his race, because in the races there hasn't been that big of a difference between him and Yuki is having great races. So it's like, why is Yuki's race seen as incredible but Daniel's isn't? Daniel's qualifying is the problem here, and he needs to sort that out. A team needs a good qualifier and a good racecraft person. Does that make sense? Yuki right now is quite strong in both. Daniel right now is quite strong in the race. So once he gets that qualifying sorted, he'll be up there, and him and Yuki will both hopefully be fighting in the points together, so they can both celebrate together. There's also this made up thing that Yuki and Daniel hate each other because Yuki unfollowed him on Instagram. But if you see how they react in real life and not just take what you see on the internet, you can see that there's no bad blood there. They're competitors at the end of the day. It can be hard for teammates to get along, but I feel like just the fandom is so hateful. It's so hateful. It can be such a horrible place to be. I try not to spend time when I don't have to. I honestly post TikToks and then just throw my phone away. And I just have so much respect for the creators who try to get rid of that toxicity and try to talk about Formula 1 in a way that isn't just to bring drama to the sport, or isn't just to cause drama or hate on another driver, bring another driver down, bring fan bases down. We also see a lot of the toxicity between Carlos and Charles fans. I talked about that last week as well, but it just gets worse, and Carlos and Charles both drove an incredible race today. They were two drivers of the day for sure. They were both incredible. Charles had a bit of places to make up since he qualified a bit lower, and he made up those places, and he made some great overtakes. And obviously Carlos maintaining and making up a couple of places as well was so impressive. I actually predicted in my TikTok, the exact outcome of the race, podium wise. So not saying anything, not saying that I have special powers, but I have special powers because I predicted that something would happen with Visa, Cash App or B, and I predicted that, and I predicted this podium. So I'll let you know before the Chinese Grand Prix what will happen. What else to talk about from the race? I mean, the overtakes were just so satisfying. The overtakes were incredible. Stroll made some good overtakes. Esteban, Yuki, some really great overtakes by everyone. The tyre strategies were a little questionable for me. Yuki started on mediums, Daniel started on mediums as well. They both said, yeah, they gave the go ahead to start on mediums whenever it was suggested to them. So they were trying to, take a bit of blame away from the team, but they got eaten up at the start. Both of them. Yuki lost a few places. He managed to fall behind Daniel at the very start. Then he gained some free air and grip. He got past Daniel, luckily, because he could have been involved in some of that mess with Daniel and Alex. Thank God he wasn't. But yeah, that was definitely a bad strategy call, which you never know. You never know what would happen. So, strategy calls mess up sometimes. So if they're on softs, there could have been a different outcome. There might not have been, though. Maybe Daniel would have been going a lot faster, that he would have, got caught up in someone else's mess. Because there were a few, Yuki and the Hasses. Lewis suggesting that he lets George by. Wasn't expecting that. I tell you what, Nico Rosberg was probably in complete shock looking at his screen when Lewis said that. But maybe the teamwork is coming into play a bit more in Mercedes. I guess it sort of always has been, to be honest. Now that I say that, George has always sort of been like, even with Latifi, it's always been like, if he needs this, I'll do it, whatever, So we love to see teamwork that benefits the team. Wasn't really that necessary in the end. They both were lacking a little bit of pace, but they still had strong races. No big faults or complaints from either of the Mercedes boys today. Logan had a good overtake on Ocon, if you saw that. I just have that wrote down. I can't remember the overtake, to be honest, but I was clearly very impressed by it. So well done, Logan. Obviously, yeah, as I said earlier, Logan had that bit of a moment, but he got the car moving. Unfortunately, he finished last. He has good races until he has moments, And I know, would you say it's a good race then if he had a moment? I don't know. But don't lose faith in him just yet, okay? Don't lose faith in him. Maybe Williams should listen to that as well. Just don't lose faith in him yet. Also, do you know what's really satisfying? Watching the Red Bulls overtake, especially Checo. Fantastic race from Checo. He was so strong. I'm so happy to see Checo doing well. He's right where Red Bull needs him to be. They don't need him challenging Max. Why would they want that? There would be so many Baku 2018 situations if that was the case. They have Checo right where he needs to be doing. He's doing his job. He's scoring enough points so Red Bull win the Constructors, and he's not challenging Max. So, that would potentially put both of their ideas of a world championship at risk. Obviously, if he could, he would. There is a bit of pace lacking compared to Max, but compared to everyone. But everyone would be lacking pace compared to Max, because I think he is just that level ahead right now from what we've seen. Yeah, really, really strong from Checo. He is my driver of the day as well. So Checo, who do we have as my drivers of the day? I'll give Carlos and Checo my two drivers of the day, and Max, because Max never gets picked as driver of the day, which I wonder if it ever hurts his feelings, because he's like, what? I literally won. I didn't make a single mistake. Look at my pace. Why aren't I driver of the day? To be fair though, imagine Max winning driver of the day and the race every single race weekend. At least someone else has a chance to win something. What else should we talk about? I've actually reached the end of my notes because I was sort of distraught after the lap 1 crash. I know I go on a rant about Daniel every single episode, but I just hate hateful people. And it's not just spreading your opinion if you're doing it in a hateful way. So that's usually where I end up on my Daniel rants. Did you actually hear in Max's radio? Max was like, oh, is everyone okay after the crash? And GP was like, yeah, Daniel was out of the car. Because let's not even pretend Alex was in the crash. Alex wasn't there. Erasure of Alex right there. Or maybe GP was like, I know you're asking about Daniel. Daniel's okay. Because Max and Daniel just have the love going on this weekend for each other. They're just such best friends, it's such like a protective friendship as well, because in the cool down room, did you see Max immediately jumping in to be like, oh, that's so unfortunate for them both, but Daniel was obviously looking to his left, so he didn't see Albon, so it wasn't his fault. The answer of the riddle is Sebastian Vettel. And I hope you got that. Obviously, Vettel has such a love for the environment now. He's very passionate about it. He's very passionate about making the world a better place, basically. I did Sebastian this week because last year in Suzuka, he brought all of the grid out to see his beehives and his insect sort of caves. Not caves. Boxes things. can't remember what they're called, but that was a really nice thing for him to do. Obviously there were a lot of insects in them. I know Ted brought us over to them on one of the broadcasts this week. But yeah, Sab has such a love for animals, but also he is an incredible Formula 1 driver. He might be again in the future, but he was the youngest ever world champion, which is where that note came from. Obviously he drove for Red Bull and won his championships and was a little less successful in Ferrari, and the entire grid loves Seb. Everyone loves Seb. Yeah, he's just like, he sort of became like a father figure to the grid, which is funny when you like compare the sort of personality that Seb used to have. Not that he was ever a bad person, but it was just like, he was like a ruthless competitor who was booed on the podium so many times, even in his Ferrari days, but mainly in his Red Bull days. But yeah, love Seb. Would love to see him back on the grid. Have I left anything out? I'm so sorry if I have. Is there anyone I haven't even mentioned? I really hope not. But I'll tell you what, once I turn on the microphone, sometimes stuff that I'm planning on talking about just goes out of my head, because now I'm panicking because this is recording me and I can see the amount of time I've been talking for right now. So I panic and stuff goes out of my head just like that. But yeah, I don't even have time to be doing this podcast today because I've so much college work to be doing. I've so many essays to write. I have exams to study for. Formula 1 comes first though. Really appreciate you being here, whoever you are listening. I was looking at some of my statistics from where the countries my listeners are from. There was someone new, I think the first person from Hong Kong, which I love you. I love you if you're listening from there. We've got a few percent from Sweden. So I've more than one Sweden listener. I love Sweden. I've never been there, but I love Sweden now that someone listens to me from Sweden. Wherever you're from, just know that I look at the countries, every single one, and I'm like, you're an iconic person for listening. So thank you. I hope you do enjoy if you listen. I hope I don't talk too fast or too slow, or I hope when I keep jumping to my different opinions, I hope that doesn't confuse you too much. But yeah, I think that's all we have for today. It's a sprint weekend in China, and remember that the sprint format has changed. So there'll be one free practice, qualifying for the sprint, qualifying for the race, and the race. I think that is the format this year. So don't forget about that. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. Obviously, I have a race review out every race weekend. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.